One evening, when I unexpectedly came back home, everything in my life took a sudden and irreversible turn. Jennifer was standing in front of the mirror, dressed in a sleek black outfit I didn't recognize, carefully applying a bold shade of red lipstick. "Do you need something?" she asked, her voice sharp and distant. Her cold tone caught me off guard, and I hesitated before responding. Then, she dropped the bombshell, "I have a date." A surge of pain and helplessness washed over me, but I managed to keep my emotions in check. Instead of begging or launching into an argument, I calmly said, "If that's what you've decided, then pack your things and leave tonight." The tension in the room was palpable as silence lingered for a moment before events spiraled into something I never could have predicted. Karma, as they say, has a way of balancing the scales, and what followed was nothing short of extraordinary. But before we dive deeper into the twists and turns of this story, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. If you're enjoying this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you're first in line for the next chapter. Welcome to the Dive Deep podcast, where we unravel the most compelling short stories. Jennifer and I had been married long enough to accumulate a treasure trove of memories, neatly tucked away in a scrapbook of our lives. Some of those pages were filled with joy, spontaneous road trips on weekends, nights spent dancing in our tiny kitchen, and the way her laughter could brighten even the gloomiest of days. Other pages bore the weight of challenges, those inevitable fights, and the compromises marriage often demands. Despite everything, I thought we had weathered life's storms together. I thought we were solid, or at least I believed that until I failed to see the cracks forming. The fire was the turning point. Our home, once a haven we'd poured love and care into, was reduced to nothing more than smoldering ash in a matter of hours. It wasn't just a loss of walls and belongings, it felt like the loss of something far more personal. We relocated to my grandmother's old house, a creaky, drafty relic of a bygone era. It wasn't perfect, but it was a roof over our heads and a chance to rebuild. For Jennifer, however, it felt less like a fresh start and more like being locked in a cage. The warmth she used to radiate began to fade, and the vibrant spark that once lit up our lives grew dim, like a candle burning down to its wick. Initially, I chalked her mood up to the stress of losing our home. Starting over from scratch can drain even the strongest of spirits. But before long, I started noticing changes, subtle at first, but impossible to ignore. Extra-long work meetings started popping up, along with nights out with friends that stretched well past the usual hours. Her phone, once casually left on the kitchen counter, was now glued to her hand, the screen always tilted away from my view. When I asked about it, she'd laugh, but it was the kind of laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just work stuff," she'd say. "You know how it is." Our conversations, once filled with banter and shared laughter, became increasingly one-sided. I'd talk, and my words would hang in the air, unanswered. Then there was the wedding ring. Some days she wore it, other days it was absent. Her excuses were flimsy at best: it didn't fit right, or she'd forgotten to put it on. It wasn't one big thing that raised alarm bells, it was the accumulation of countless small moments, each one adding to the growing unease I tried so hard to suppress. I convinced myself it was just a rough patch, something we'd get through like we always had. But late at night, as I lay awake in the unfamiliar shadows of a house that never quite felt like home, I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that this time was different. It wasn't just the fire that had stolen our home, it felt like it had stolen us. And though I couldn't pinpoint exactly what had gone wrong, one thing was painfully clear: Jennifer wasn't the same woman I had married. At first, I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Every marriage has its ups and downs, and I figured this was just another hurdle. But as days turned into weeks, her distance became more pronounced, and the silence between us grew unbearable. The easy flow of our conversations, once like a familiar, comforting song, was now replaced by the stark, unyielding coldness of indifference. I'd ask her how her day went, but her answers felt hollow, short, routine, as if she was just going through the motions instead of genuinely connecting. One evening, I thought maybe something simple could reignite that spark between us. "Want to watch your favorite show tonight?" I asked, keeping my voice light, almost hopeful. It was one of those small traditions we used to cherish, curling up together on the couch, laughing at the same jokes we'd heard a dozen times. She barely glanced up from her phone. "No, I'm tired," she muttered, her tone flat and distant. Later that night, I caught her smothering a giggle while staring at her screen. But it wasn't the kind of laugh you let slip for a meme or some viral video. It felt different, soft, warm, the kind of laugh you save for someone you care about. Someone who wasn't me. The shifts in her behavior were subtle at first, almost easy to overlook if you weren't paying attention. Her closet started to change. The jeans and loose sweaters she used to favor gave way to sleek dresses and accessories that felt more deliberate, more polished. She insisted it was just for work, but her job hadn't changed in years. I noticed she spent more time in front of the mirror, carefully applying makeup with an attention to detail I hadn't seen since our early days. It wasn't that she wasn't beautiful, Jennifer had always been stunning. It was the intent behind it that gnawed at me. She wasn't doing it for me. And then there were those work meetings. They started popping up more often than I could make sense of. She'd come home late, the faintest trace of perfume still clinging to her skin. Meeting ran long, she'd say, eyes flicking away from mine. I wanted to trust her. I wanted to believe it was nothing. But the puzzle pieces just didn't fit together. The Jennifer I married didn't dodge questions. She didn't hide her phone the moment I entered the room. And she never forgot to wear her wedding ring, until now. Every one of those small moments chipped away at whatever hope I was holding on to. I'd sit alone in the living room, replaying the day in my head, looking for some sign that I was wrong. Maybe she really was just tired. Maybe the stress was wearing her down. I told myself she just needed a little time. But those doubts, the ones I kept pushing away, always came creeping back. Why didn't she laugh like that when she was with me? Who was she texting late at night, her phone practically glued to her palm? There were nights I nearly said something. The words felt like they were rising in my throat, but every time, I swallowed them down. I'd sit there, watching her as the pale light of her phone screen flickered across her face, and I'd wonder if she was already gone. My mind ran in circles, playing out scenario after scenario, none of them good. Was she seeing someone else? Had she grown tired of our life together? Or was I just imagining things, making something out of nothing? Then came the night everything shifted. I walked into the living room without a sound and found her on the couch, her face bright with a smile I hadn't seen in what felt like forever. She was laughing, really laughing, her body leaning into the moment like she was sharing some private joke. I stood there, frozen in place, watching as she typed something on her phone. Whoever was on the other end had all her attention. That laugh wasn't meant for me. My stomach twisted, a mess of anger, sadness, and something I couldn't quite name burning in my chest. I turned and walked away, but something inside me cracked. The denial started to slip through my fingers. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just in my head anymore. Jennifer was slipping away, and I had no idea if I could bring her back. That winter evening, I came home to a house that felt too still, too quiet. It wasn't the comfortable silence we used to share. This was different. The kind of silence that feels heavy, pressing against your ears like a warning. The early dark of winter had blanketed the street, and the cold seemed to creep in through the walls. I stepped inside, and right away, I knew something was off. Jennifer's music wasn't playing. There was no scent of dinner drifting from the kitchen. The house felt empty. But there was something else. A faint trace of perfume lingered in the air, one I hadn't smelled on her in months. It clung there like a ghost. "Jennifer." I called out, breaking the silence. "Nothing." "Jennifer." I said again, my voice catching slightly. No response. The soft glow of light from upstairs spilled faintly down the stairwell, pulling me forward. The stairs groaned beneath my feet with each step, the sound amplifying the tension coiling tighter in my stomach. By the time I reached the top, the weight in my chest felt suffocating. And then I saw her. She stood at the dresser, carefully applying makeup, unaware of my presence. Her reflection stared back at me from the mirror, focused, deliberate, her hand steady as she leaned into perfect the bold red lipstick. The black dress she wore hugged her figure in a way that left little to the imagination. It was sleek, new, and far shorter than anything I'd seen her wear before. Beside her, a pair of high heels sat, waiting to complete the ensemble. "Are we going somewhere?" I asked, my voice cutting through the stillness. I kept my tone level, but it did little to mask the storm raging beneath the surface. Her hand paused for just a second before her eyes met mine in the mirror. There wasn't a flicker of guilt or surprise in her expression. Just irritation, as if I were an unwanted distraction. "No," she said plainly, turning her attention back to the mirror. "I have a date." The word struck like a slap, but I refused to let my composure slip. "A date," I echoed, forcing my voice to stay even. "With someone else?" Her lips tugged into a faint smirk as she twisted the cap onto the lipstick. "Yes. With someone who actually appreciates me." I stared at her, this stranger standing where my wife used to be. The longer I looked, the less familiar she felt. My mind scrambled for the right response, but the ache tightening in my chest left me speechless. Finally, I found my voice. "If that's how it is," I said quietly, "then pack your things and leave tonight. If you're serious about this, you can't stay here." Jennifer turned to face me fully, crossing her arms as indignation flared across her face. "I'm not going anywhere," she snapped, standing her ground. "I like this house. And when it's mine, I'll do whatever I want with it." I exhaled slowly, gripping the doorframe to steady myself. "Jennifer, I'm not going to argue with you. If you want out, fine. But you're not staying here while you run around with someone else. That's not happening." Her eyes narrowed, and the smirk returned, this time sharper, laced with bitterness. "Oh, you think you can just kick me out?" she sneered. "Try it. I'll call the cops and tell them you threatened me. Maybe I'll say you hit me. You know how that goes. They'll drag you out of here for 48 hours, and by the time you come back, the locks will be changed." Her words hit their mark, but I swallowed the anger burning in my throat. "You really think threats are going to scare me?" I asked, keeping my voice as steady as I could manage. "You can have this house, after you've moved out and everything's settled. But until then, I'm done playing along." Jennifer laughed, a sharp, humorless sound that hung in the air. "You think you're in control here?" she said, shaking her head. "You're pathetic." I took a step closer, meeting her gaze without flinching. "No, Jennifer. I think I've just had enough." Her eyes flickered, but she didn't respond. "Do yourself a favor and leave tonight," I added, my tone firm but calm. "Go stay with your parents. Or with whoever it is you're dressing up for." She rolled her eyes, snatching a small clutch from the dresser with exaggerated indifference. "I'll be back in 30 minutes, she muttered, her voice dripping with disdain. "You better not be here when I get back. Otherwise, you'll regret it." Jennifer brushed past me, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood as she disappeared down the stairs. The front door slammed shut behind her, and I was left standing alone in the empty silence of the house. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just stared at the space where she'd been, letting the weight of her words settle over me like a lead blanket. But instead of sinking into despair, something else stirred beneath the surface, a quiet, cold resolve. She thought she could manipulate me. Control me. She was wrong. This wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It was about reclaiming what was left of my life, my dignity, and the home I had fought to rebuild. Jennifer could throw insults, threats, and ultimatums at me all she wanted. But soon enough, she'd realize I wasn't the same man she thought she could walk all over. The garage was cloaked in shadows, save for the dim flicker of a single bulb swaying above, casting jagged silhouettes along the walls. I stood beneath it, the cool weight of the aluminum bat resting firm in my grip. It felt solid, real, something to anchor me as the storm inside me churned. My heart drummed steadily in my chest, each beat loud in the heavy stillness. Just outside, her car sat like a monument to defiance, a polished reminder of how she flaunted her freedom while I stayed rooted in the wreckage of our life. I tightened my grip and swung. The first strike shattered the taillight, shards of red plastic scattering across the driveway. It felt like splintering glass in my chest, sharp, but satisfying. Another swing cracked the headlight, plunging the front of the car into darkness. Each hit was measured, each one stripping away a small piece of the power she thought she held over me. Her phone was next. It sat smugly on the kitchen counter, practically humming with messages I'd never read, conversations I wasn't part of. I yanked out the battery and carried it to the garage. One swing of the hammer, and it was reduced to broken glass and fractured circuits. I slipped the remains back into her purse, leaving the battery behind. Tonight, the world she lived in without me would go silent. If she wanted to disappear, she'd have to walk. When she finally descended the stairs, ready for her night out, she looked like she'd stepped off a magazine cover. The black dress clung to her, every detail feeling like a deliberate taunt. Her lips were painted that same defiant red, bold and unapologetic. She stopped cold when she saw me. "Out," she snapped, pointing toward the door without missing a beat. "I don't have time for this." I didn't budge. I poured coffee instead, the rich scent filling the air, stretching the silence between us. I leaned back casually, cradling the cup in my hand, and took a slow sip. "Good luck tonight," I said smoothly, not an ounce of venom in my voice. Her eyes narrowed. "What did you do?" she asked, suspicion lacing every word. I tipped my head toward the driveway. "Why don't you check your car?" Her heels struck the floor like gunfire as she stormed outside. Seconds later, her angry yell echoed down the street. It was the kind of sound that made you grit your teeth, sharp and feral. She came stomping back inside, her face flushed with fury. "You son of a bitch," she seethed. "I'll call someone to come get me." I nodded toward her purse. "You'll need your phone for that." She tore through the bag, yanking the phone out, her fingers jabbing at the power button. "Nothing." "You broke my phone," she shrieked, her voice rattling the windows. "Maybe you should have kept better track of it," I said, my tone drifting somewhere between indifference and amusement. With a string of curses under her breath, she kicked off the heels and swapped them for sneakers. I stayed behind as she stomped toward the garage, watching quietly from the shadows. She slid into the driver's seat of my Suburban, the Beast, as she used to call it, without a second thought. The engine rumbled to life, a low growl that filled the tight space. Jennifer hit the button for the garage door. Nothing happened. She jabbed it again. Still nothing. Frustration boiled over. Her foot slammed onto the gas pedal. The Beast lurched forward, smashing into the garage door with a teeth-rattling screech. Wood splintered. Metal groaned. The whole house shook from the force of the impact. But the real disaster waited outside. Parked just beyond the garage door was a police cruiser. Jennifer didn't see it, at least not until the Beast crunched into it, folding the front end like an accordion. One of the officers had just opened the door when the impact sent him sprawling onto the driveway. Chaos exploded instantly. The second officer, red hair flashing under the streetlights, reacted fast. She hauled Jennifer out of the driver's seat, dragging her onto the driveway. On the ground, the officer barked, her voice cutting through Jennifer's incoherent screams. Jennifer thrashed, twisting wildly in the officer's grip. You don't understand. He did this. This isn't my fault. I hurried toward the officer on the ground, crouching beside him as he held his face, blood seeping between his fingers. Hold still, I said, gently steadying his head. Help's on the way. The entire scene blurred into flashing lights and hurried voices. Neighbors gathered along their porches, their figures outlined against the cold winter night, watching silently as the chaos unfolded. Jennifer, sobbing and cuffed, was ushered into the back of a police cruiser. Her shouts and accusations faded beneath the hum of the emergency response. I stood quietly in the driveway, watching as the wreckage slowly got cleared away. The beast, her final act of reckless desperation, was winched onto a tow truck, its front end crumpled beyond recognition. A few officers approached with questions, their expressions balancing professionalism with something close to pity. I answered evenly, recounting each detail without exaggeration or bitterness. By the time Jennifer's car had been towed and the last of the flashing lights disappeared down the road, I felt something I hadn't in months: relief. The storm had passed. And with it, the fragile illusion of what our marriage had once been. This wasn't about the garage or the Suburban. It wasn't even about Jennifer's arrest. This was about truth, the stark, unavoidable truth that whatever we'd been holding onto had unraveled long ago. For the first time in a long while, I could breathe. The courtroom's walls were a dull, uninspired gray, fitting for the battle playing out within them. The heavy carpet muted every sound, swallowing the tension that hung between us. Jennifer sat across the table, her shoulders squared and stiff, though the flicker of frustration betrayed the cracks beneath her rigid exterior. Her lawyer, a slick, overconfident man with a comb-over that tried too hard, leaned forward, sliding a neatly bound stack of papers across the table toward my lawyer. "She wants the house," he said smoothly, his voice oozing certainty. "Or half of its value. Given the circumstances, I'd say that's more than fair." I glanced at my lawyer, a calm, meticulous woman who had the air of someone who'd already anticipated every word that left his mouth. Without missing a beat, she unclasped her briefcase and pulled out a single document, placing it on the table with deliberate care. "The house isn't community property," she replied, sliding the paper right back at him. "It belongs to my client's father. Jennifer has no legal claim to it." For the first time, Jennifer's confidence flickered, though she masked it quickly. Leaning in, she whispered something to her lawyer, her lips pressed thin. His smirk faltered as he scanned the document, the creases in his forehead deepening with each line he read. This can't be right," he muttered, but his voice carried the unmistakable tremor of doubt. "It's correct," my lawyer said, her tone cool and unwavering. "As for the furniture and appliances, receipts show they were purchased through my client's father's account. They aren't considered marital property." Jennifer's knuckles whitened as her hands clenched into fists on the table. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably, shuffling through his papers as if he might unearth some overlooked advantage. "What about the fire insurance payout?" he asked, his voice tinged with a creeping desperation. My lawyer didn't hesitate. "The payout covered jointly incurred debts," she said evenly. "There's nothing left to dispute." Jennifer's facade cracked. She folded her arms across her chest and fixed her gaze on me, eyes burning with betrayal. "You're leaving me with nothing," she snapped, loud enough to draw a ripple of murmurs from the courtroom. "That's not entirely true," my lawyer said with a slight, almost playful lift of her brow. "We're willing to let her keep one of the bedroom sets. For sentimental reasons." The room went quiet. Jennifer's lawyer shifted, clearly aware of how thoroughly the argument had slipped through his fingers. Jennifer, on the other hand, didn't bother concealing her anger. She pushed back from the table with enough force to rattle her chair and stormed out of the courtroom, leaving her lawyer to clean up what was left of the negotiations. When the dust settled, the settlement was modest. Jennifer walked away with her car and a portion of the money she'd drained from our joint account, but little else. She'd gambled on the assumption that the court would bend in her favor, and lost. As the judge finalized the divorce, he offered a rare comment, commending me for the foresight I'd shown in protecting my assets. I left the courthouse with no celebration, no sense of victory. But as I stepped into the winter air, I felt lighter. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even justice. It was closure. It was never about revenge or proving a point. It was about regaining balance, taking back the parts of my life that felt like they'd been slipping away for years. When the gavel finally came down, it wasn't just the legal end of our marriage. It was the closure I hadn't realized I needed. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt untethered, free to rebuild a life that belonged solely to me. The morning after Jennifer's departure marked a new chapter, though I wasn't quite sure how to begin. The house felt strangely quiet, not the heavy, suffocating kind of silence that had lingered for months, but a stillness that carried a sense of peace. A blank slate. I stood by the window with a steaming cup of coffee, watching as the soft light of dawn crept through the trees. The tension that used to gnaw at me, always bracing for the next fight, the next lie, was gone. In its place was something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Rebuilding felt like a mix of challenge and relief. The house, with its creaky floorboards and faded walls, became my project. I didn't fix it up for anyone else this time, just for me. There was something cathartic in the simplicity of it. Painting rooms, replacing fixtures, sanding down old doors. Each task felt like reclaiming a little more of myself. I started revisiting old hobbies, things I'd abandoned somewhere along the way. The shooting range became a familiar escape again, a place where focus and precision drowned out the noise in my head. One afternoon, I ran into Sergeant Sweet, the officer who had cuffed Jennifer the night everything unraveled. She looked different out of uniform, standing there in jeans and a jacket, but her presence was as steady as I remembered. We exchanged polite small talk at first, but soon those conversations stretched out, lingering longer each time. There was something easy about talking to her, an unspoken understanding that neither of us had to explain. She'd been through her own share of heartache, though hers hadn't involved smashed cars or courtroom battles. Coffee after this? I asked one day, surprising even myself. I hadn't felt that nervous in years. To my relief, she smiled, her eyes softening in a way that made me feel like maybe things were starting to shift. Sure, she said, tucking a stray piece of hair behind her ear. As long as we don't talk about work. That first coffee turned into dinner, and then another, until it became part of our routine. With Jessica, sweet Jessica, as I came to know her, I rediscovered something I hadn't realized I was missing. Trust. It wasn't about grand gestures or elaborate promises. It was the little things. The way she'd refill my drink without asking. The way she listened, really listened, when I talked. The way her laugh came without hesitation, warm and genuine. We took our time, careful but hopeful. Slowly, life began to feel lighter. I found joy in small, ordinary moments, teaching her how to make an old family recipe, hiking trails neither of us had explored before, sitting quietly together on the porch as the sun dipped below the trees. Before long, it became clear that we both wanted the same things, a relationship grounded in respect, shared understanding, and the lessons our pasts had etched into us. 9 months after that first coffee, we stood hand in hand, exchanging simple vows in front of close friends and family. She wasn't just my wife. She was my partner, my equal, my friend. Looking back now, I see those months weren't just about fixing a house or finding someone new. They were about piecing together parts of myself I thought were long gone. The scars of the past didn't fade completely, but they became reminders of how far I'd come. Life didn't just return to normal. It became richer, fuller, more meaningful than I ever thought possible. Now, as I stand beside Jessica, watching her laugh at one of the kids' jokes, I know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Standing on the porch of my grandmother's house, weathered but sturdy, much like the life I rebuilt, I watch my daughter's face light up as I place the keys in her hand. This house, this life, it's hers now. And for the first time in years, I feel like I've come full circle. The joy in her eyes reflected the same hope I once carried when Jennifer and I first stepped into this house years ago. But this time, it felt different. The house wasn't just another stop along the way, it was a gift, a foundation for something new. A fresh start, not just for her, but for all of us. In that moment, life felt like it had come full circle. Getting here wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of betrayal and upheaval felt unbearable. But those moments shaped me. They forged resilience where doubt used to live, taught me patience I didn't know I had, and reminded me that self-respect wasn't something to be bargained away. Jennifer's choices nearly broke me. But in the wreckage, I found pieces of myself I hadn't realized were missing, fragments I'd let slip away in the chaos of our marriage. At first, I wrestled with the questions that kept me up at night. Why had it happened? Could I have changed the outcome? But as time passed, the need for answers faded. In their place was something quieter, more certain. Not every battle is meant to be won, and not every ending is a failure. Jennifer's chaos wasn't just destruction, it was the spark that set me on a new path. Rebuilding my life wasn't something that happened by chance. I chose it, piece by piece. I found comfort in the smallest things, patching up the house, spending evenings at the range, reaching out to old friends I'd lost touch with. Every step forward felt like fitting a puzzle together, the picture of who I was becoming clearer with each piece. Meeting Sergeant Sweet wasn't something I planned, but it was exactly what I needed. Her calm presence was the opposite of the storm I'd survived, and in her I rediscovered something I didn't realize I'd been craving: trust. Our life together isn't grand or flashy, but it's steady. Fulfilling. We've built a partnership grounded in honesty and mutual respect, free from the manipulation and insecurity that once weighed me down. Celebrating our anniversary on a quiet river cruise in Europe, surrounded by laughter and good company, felt like proof of how far I'd come. It wasn't just a celebration of our relationship, it was a testament to the strength that had grown out of the ruins of my past. Handing over the keys to my daughter felt right. The house, once a reminder of pain and uncertainty, had transformed into something else, a symbol of renewal. I didn't feel grateful for the chaos, but I appreciated the lessons it left behind. Life rarely unfolds the way we expect. The detours, the heartbreak, they can feel impossible to navigate when you're in the thick of it. But as I look back, I see how those trials weren't obstacles. They were turning points, shaping me into someone stronger and more grounded. Losing my home, my marriage, and the illusion of stability forced me to grow in ways I never anticipated. And now, standing here watching my daughter take the first steps into her future, I realize I wouldn't change a thing. Not because the path was easy, but because those hard roads led me to a life I never could have imagined, one filled with trust, quiet joy, and love that didn't come with conditions. I smile as she thanks me, and I know the words I offer her are more than just a platitude. Life doesn't always go as planned, I say, resting a hand on her shoulder. But sometimes the detours take you exactly where you're meant to be. And for the first time in years, I know that's the absolute truth.